She raised her hand in a silent cry for help, just one small gesture in a sea of strangers at LAX. No one saw it, except Keanu Reeves. Beside him, Steven Seagal stood frozen. What they did next exposed a secret buried deep inside the airport. But who was the girl, and how far would her captors go? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. LAX was a storm of motion that never paused. Announcements crackled from unseen speakers, luggage wheels scraped across tile, and coffee orders were shouted into the noise like they mattered more than anything else. But in a quiet corner near an out-of-the-way cafe, Keanu Reeves sat alone, sipping green tea and listening to none of it. He wore a worn hoodie, the drawstrings tucked in, sunglasses resting on the table beside him. Most people didn't notice him. That was the idea. He'd just come from a low-profile charity event that afternoon, a fundraiser for an organization that helped locate missing and exploited children. No press, no red carpet. Just survivors, quiet voices, and the kind of stories that stayed with you. He hadn't said much. He'd only listened. And now, he was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Across from him, the window stretched wide, showing the endless movement of travelers. None of them looked up. No one noticed anyone. Keanu liked it that way. He wasn't in a rush. His flight to Vancouver was delayed, and for once, he didn't mind. Then, a familiar voice broke through the haze. "Is this seat taken, or are you planning to philosophize alone all afternoon?" Keanu looked up, then smiled. Steven Seagal stood there with a slight grin, a carry-on slung over one shoulder and the kind of presence that still turned heads when he walked. They hadn't seen each other in a few years. Last time was at a humanitarian film festival in Croatia. Different lives, same missions. They'd always found middle ground. "Steven," Keanu said, gesturing to the seat. "It's all yours." The two settled into an easy rhythm, old friends, reconnecting without pretense. They talked quietly about overseas projects, strange travel stories, the latest martial arts camp Steven was funding for at-risk youth. It was the kind of conversation that made the noise of the airport feel far away. Then Keanu stopped talking, mid-sentence. His gaze drifted beyond Steven's shoulder, narrowing in on something or someone in the chaos outside the glass wall of the lounge. His entire posture shifted. His fingers curled slightly around the edge of his cup, his jaw locked. Steven noticed the change instantly. "What is it?" he asked. But Keanu didn't answer. He stood slowly, never taking his eyes off the concourse. His voice dropped. "There, near the newsstand." Steven turned in his chair, following his line of sight, and saw her. She couldn't have been older than 8. Blonde hair tangled and dull, pale skin that hadn't seen the sun in days. Her cheeks were blotched red from crying, and her eyes, they looked like they'd run out of tears hours ago. Her left wrist bore a faint purple bruise, as if someone had grabbed her too hard and for too long. In her arms, she held a small, worn teddy bear, its fur thinned in patches, one button eye missing, its stitched smile crooked and faded. She stood perfectly still while the crowd churned around her. Travelers, workers, families, all moving, all rushing past without ever seeing her. It was like she didn't exist, except to the man next to her. He had one large hand clenched on her shoulder, fingers pressing deep into her jacket like a clamp. His other hand gripped a cell phone. He barked something into it, low and fast, in a language neither Keanu nor Steven recognized immediately. He didn't smile, didn't glance down at the girl. He wasn't guiding her. He was holding her, containing her. Keanu's chest tightened. Every instinct in him rose. Steven scanned the crowd further. 2 other men, both in plain clothes, stood casually apart, one pretending to read flight listings, the other watching from a bench. Neither of them looked like they belonged, but both of them had eyes on the man and the girl. Then it happened. The little girl, standing still in the tide of people, slowly lifted her hand, palm out, thumb tucked in. Fingers curled over the thumb. Steven leaned forward. "Was that?" Keanu's voice was a whisper, but it hit like a hammer. It's the signal. Steven's jaw tightened. You sure? I'm sure. It was the international sign for distress. A silent SOS. A cry for help without a sound. Taught in schools. Shared in campaigns. Used by children who couldn't scream. And now, here she was standing in the middle of LAX, using it. For a long second, neither man moved. Then Keanu set his tea down gently on the table. His eyes never left the girl. We can't look away, he said. Steven didn't argue. He rose beside him, scanning the concourse for exits, security stations, and sightlines. The girl had dropped her hand now, but her body was stiff, her eyes downcast. Do we go now? Steven asked. Not yet, Keanu replied, his voice flat. But we don't lose her. They stepped out of the cafe, blending into the steady stream of travelers without drawing attention. Keanu adjusted the hood of his sweatshirt, head slightly lowered. Steven moved like a shadow beside him, hands loose at his sides, scanning for details. The man with the girl wasn't rushing, but he wasn't wandering either. Every step he took was deliberate. When someone passed too close, he pulled the girl closer, his fingers digging in just enough to make her flinch. The watchers in the distance shifted their positions again. One pretended to check his watch. The other drifted to a kiosk, pretending to browse gum. Keanu's voice was low. They're moving as a unit. This isn't random. Steven nodded once. Professionals, coordinated. The girl's not just being taken, she's being transferred. They followed at a distance, not close enough to be noticed, but never losing sight. As the man and the girl passed by the duty-free shop, Keanu pulled out his phone and, without looking down, snapped a quick photo. The flash was off. The sound was off. Just one clean image. The man's hand gripping the girl's shoulder, the bruised wrist, the teddy bear clutched like a lifeline. He tapped out a short message and sent it to someone labeled only as C. It read, "Need eyes fast. LAX terminal. Urgent." Steven had already started a call of his own. His voice was quiet, firm. Yeah, it's me. I need gate data and manifest checks for Priority 17. Pull footage from the past hour, look for 5 individuals moving staggered. 1 adult male with a girl around age 8. No delays. Discreet. He hung up and looked ahead again. The girl was walking slower now. Her legs were tired. But the man never loosened his grip. She's being taken to a gate, Keanu said. Not baggage claim. This isn't local. They're flying her out, Steven muttered. Domestic or international? Doesn't matter, Keanu replied. If she gets on that plane, she disappears. The group turned down a long hallway marked for premium boarding. Ahead, a sign read, "Priority passengers only." The man and the girl moved with certainty. Not like they were finding their way, like they'd already rehearsed it. Keanu and Steven slowed, drifting to one side to keep a clean line of sight. Keanu checked his phone. A reply had come in. 5 people, all booked together, cleared with VIP status. No flags. Steven's phone buzzed too. Same info. Pre-cleared. No secondary screening. Internal override codes. Keanu looked at Steven. Someone inside is protecting this. Steven's eyes darkened. Then we're not just chasing traffickers. They watched as the man and the girl reached the gate. One of the watchers stepped casually into position near a vending machine. The other leaned on a wall, watching the surrounding crowd. This wasn't improvisation, it was operation. And the girl, she looked over her shoulder once more. Just for a second, she saw Keanu. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes said everything. Please. Keanu turned to Steven. We can't stop them. Not here. Not yet. Steven clenched his jaw. Then we follow. Every step. And with that, the 2 men moved forward, steady and silent, into a situation that would unravel everything they thought they knew about justice, authority, and what it really means to protect the innocent. Keanu and Steven moved into the crowd, blending in like travelers searching for their gate. But their eyes never wavered. They tracked the man and the girl with quiet precision, always adjusting to keep them in view. No sudden movements, no rushing, just steady, practice steps. The terminal around them was a blur of noise and color families herding children, solo travelers with earbuds, pilots cutting diagonally toward their next departure. But Keanu had trained his eyes to filter the chaos. The girl was easy to spot now. Her small frame, her slow steps, the way she kept her head down, and always that bear in her arms, like it was the only anchor holding her to earth. Steven leaned in slightly, watched the guy by the Hudson newsstand, dark coat, pretending to read. Keanu glanced without turning his head. The man flipped through a magazine, but his eyes weren't on the page. They were angled toward the girl. He wasn't browsing, he was monitoring. "There's another," Keanu said. "Blue hoodie, carrying a duffel, walking casual, but he's too close." Steven sighed quietly. "3 handlers, 1 girl, and 1 exit," Keanu replied. "They're bottling her in." He pulled out his phone again and brought up his encrypted messaging app. He snapped a new photo of the group this time, including all 3 men in the frame, staggered around the girl like chess pieces closing in. His thumb tapped quickly. He sent it to a contact named Sam, an investigative journalist he'd worked with on trafficking stories in the past. "Urgent. Possible child trafficking. LAX Terminal 4. Priority gate. Track this. Use back channels." Steven made a call of his own. He ducked behind a column to avoid being overheard. "Greg, it's me," he said softly. "I need you to run an override query on LAX security logs. Terminal 4. Priority boarding gate 17. Group of 5. 1 male with a young girl. 3 adult males total. No parents, no documentation visible. I need confirmation on clearance level." He listened, then frowned. Greg had access, but even he sounded hesitant. "Steven, those names are VIP tagged. Internal override, flagged. DHS pre-screened. No red flags, no incident alerts." Steven's voice stayed calm. "Then flag it now." Greg lowered his voice. "I'm telling you this smells bad, but someone upstairs cleared them. I don't know who. And if I flag it, I could lose access." Steven paused. "Understood." He ended the call and looked at Keanu. "They're pre-cleared. No secondary screening." "Someone's helping them." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And that girl's the reason." The girl and her captor continued down the long concourse toward the far end of Terminal 4. They passed a set of restrooms, then a series of closed shops undergoing renovations. No cameras, no witnesses paying attention, just enough isolation for things to happen unnoticed. Keanu slowed his pace, letting a group of travelers push ahead and provide natural cover. "They're not hurrying," he said under his breath. "Means they're confident." Steven nodded. "Or protected." They moved with purpose, careful not to close the gap too much. The man with the girl seemed calm on the outside, but his body language told a different story. Every so often, he checked behind them, not obviously, but with just enough head movement to signal nervousness. The way his fingers flexed against the girl's shoulder told Keanu everything he needed to know. This wasn't a parent. This was a courier. "Look," Steven muttered. "Blue hoodie is circling wide, getting ahead of them." Sure enough, the second watcher was now positioned closer to the gate area, idling near a wall-mounted charging station. He plugged in his phone, but his eyes never strayed far from the group. The first watcher magazine man was trailing, glancing at overhead screens to sell the illusion. The 3 men formed a triangle around the girl, space just wide enough to make intervention risky. Keanu exhaled slowly. "They've run this before. She's not the first." Steven scanned the space ahead. "Gate 17's at the end. Private access for corporate flights and priority travelers." Keanu's phone buzzed. Sam had replied. "Confirmed. Passenger manifest. For Gate 17, lists 5 adults, 1 child. All pre-cleared. No match on the girl's identity from missing persons so far. But this reeks. I'm digging deeper. Call me if you get stuck." He didn't respond. Not yet. As they neared the final bend in the terminal, Keanu and Steven ducked into the shadow of a support pillar, letting a flight crew pass between them and the group. Then, something happened that neither man expected. The girl turned her head. Just for a second, she looked back over her shoulder, directly at Keanu. Her eyes locked with his. And in that moment, everything changed. There was no panic in her face, just exhaustion and a plea. He knew she had no words left, no strength to scream. That one look said everything. She knew they were there, and she was hoping they were different from the rest. Steven saw it too, the girl's glance. Quick, sharp, desperate. She didn't move her lips. She didn't wave, but her stare lingered just long enough to make one thing clear. She was hoping he would follow. Keanu took a slow breath and held it for a second. That kind of moment had weight. He had felt it before. On movie sets, when time froze right before a crucial scene. In real life, when strangers quietly asked for help without ever speaking. But this was different. This wasn't scripted. And if they didn't act soon, she might vanish before anyone even noticed she was missing. "She saw me," Keanu said quietly. Steven nodded. "She knows." They resumed their pace, letting a group of travelers with backpacks create distance. Keanu spoke low. "We need to close the gap without triggering the handlers." Steven scanned the past. Surroundings. Security desk is back by gate 12. Too far. And we already know the internal system is compromised. Keanu touched the side of his phone, then turned off cellular entirely. "If someone's monitoring comms, we're not giving them anything else." Steven mirrored the move. No more texts, no more calls. From this point on, it would be instinct, training, and timing. The group ahead had reached the boarding gate. It wasn't the usual open waiting area. Instead, it was set into a side hallway, marked with a sleek plaque. Priority boarding, private clearance, only. A rope barrier had been pulled aside. A single gate attendant stood behind a podium, typing something into her terminal. Behind her, a glass door led to a small jet bridge, curtained for discretion. Keanu noticed something subtle. The man with the girl didn't speak to the attendant. He just looked toward a hallway on the right, barely visible, and waited. A moment later, a man in a black vest stepped out from that hallway. He wore polished shoes, an ID badge, and an earpiece. Operations manager. Steven muttered, "That's the gatekeeper. Not TSA, not law enforcement, but he controls who moves and who stops." They watched as the man with the girl gave the faintest nod to the operations manager. It wasn't friendly. It was confirmation. Blue Hoodie stepped into position near a trash can on the far side of the gate. Magazine Man leaned casually against a wall near the vending machines. All three were now in place, tightening the formation. "Too late to call for backup," Keanu said. Steven's jaw was tight, and no one's coming anyway. The girl didn't look back again. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the floor, her bear clutched tighter than before. Keanu stepped closer to Steven, just enough for their shoulders to nearly touch. "If we go now, it escalates. If we wait, she boards that plane," Steven replied. They were running out of options. And time. But there was one thing they both understood without saying it out loud. Whatever happened next, whatever lines they had to cross, there was no turning back. They would not let her go. Keanu approached the boarding counter calmly, his posture relaxed, but his voice was steady and clear. The gate agent looked up from her screen with a practiced airline smile, expecting another first-class traveler inquiring about upgrades or delays. She didn't expect Keanu Reeves. "Hi," he said softly, showing her the photo on his phone. "This man and the girl beside him, what gate are they boarding through?" The agent's expression flickered. She glanced down at her terminal. "I'm sorry, sir. Those passengers are cleared through Priority 17, pre-screened." "Are they boarding now?" he asked. "Yes, they're on our pre-check list. They've already been scanned and approved." Steven stepped forward. "We believe the child may be in danger. Her body language, her bruises, the way she signaled, we're asking you to delay boarding for a secondary verification." The agent looked uncertain now. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Before she could respond, the operations manager appeared from the side hallway. He moved fast, like someone who was waiting for this moment. His black vest was sharp, and his laminated badge reflected the fluorescent light above. His shoes didn't squeak on the tile. They didn't dare. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, placing himself between them and the gate, "can I help you with something?" Keanu turned toward him, calm but firm. That child may be in danger. We're asking for a secondary check before you let her board. The man didn't flinch. He offered a clipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. That passenger is cleared under our VIP protocol. All documentation has been verified by federal partners. There's nothing more to be done. Steven narrowed his eyes. VIP protocol doesn't mean she's safe. You don't know her situation. The man's voice dropped slightly, still polite, still rehearsed. We do know her situation. We have documentation. Your concern is noted, but unless you have law enforcement credentials, we're not detaining pre-cleared passengers based on speculation. Keanu glanced at the girl. She was now standing near the velvet rope, flanked by the two watchers. The main handler still held her shoulder, tighter now. I'm not speculating, Keanu said. I saw the signal, and she looked right at me. The manager tilted his head slightly, the smile thinning. Sir, I understand you may believe you've witnessed something troubling, but this is a functioning international terminal. We can't delay departures based on interpretation. Then the man did something small but devastating. He lifted his hand, tapped the earpiece tucked beneath his collar, and murmured something. And Keanu knew. Keanu's eyes locked onto the subtle press of fingers against the man's earpiece. It was fast, natural, disguised as routine communication, but it wasn't. That wasn't a report. It was a signal. He was warning someone. Steven caught it too. He leaned slightly toward Keanu and whispered, "He's part of it. Maybe not the whole operation, but he's clearing the way." Keanu's shoulders squared. Then we're running out of time. The gate agent hesitated. She'd heard everything. Her fingers were still hovering, but now they trembled slightly. Steven turned to her again. We're not trying to disrupt anything, but that child made a universal SOS signal. If you know what that is, you know this is serious. We're not asking you to detain. We're asking you to check. That's it. Before she could respond, the operations manager stepped in, voice rising just enough to shift the tone. This is not a public discussion. You've made your concerns clear, and we've responded appropriately. But we will not delay a flight or interfere with cleared passengers based on feelings or theories. Keanu remained calm. It's not a theory. It's a pattern. 3 men with a child. No luggage for her. No emotional connection. No paperwork she's visibly carrying. No eye contact from her. She looked at us like she was already gone. The man cut in, louder now. Enough. You are not law enforcement. You are not gate personnel. And unless you can produce immediate documentation authorizing a stop, I will ask you to leave this area. Steven folded his arms. She's not a carry-on. She's a human being. The manager's jaw twitched, but he didn't lose his smile. Instead, he stepped aside slightly and extended his arm behind him. The man with the girl was already moving. He guided her gently, but firmly, away from the waiting area. Not toward the jet bridge, not toward the seating zone, toward a nearby side door. It was marked in bold red letters, "Authorized personnel only." Keanu's heart sank. That wasn't the boarding route. That was a staff corridor, a shortcut to the private tarmac, maybe even an underground access route. No cameras, no security checkpoint, just a quick exit to the next phase. Steven's hand dropped to his side. "We have to move," he whispered. Keanu didn't argue. The gate agent stood frozen. She wanted to speak, but the man beside her was in control now, and she knew it. The door hissed open. The handler pulled the girl through, and the clock started ticking, for real. The moment the door closed behind the handler and the girl, Keanu stepped forward, reaching for the handle. It didn't budge. "Badge access only." He turned back toward the operations manager, whose expression had hardened. "That area is restricted," the man said firmly. "You're not authorized to enter." Steven stepped forward slowly, his eyes narrowed. "Who gave you authorization to reroute passengers through a service corridor?" "They're not regular passengers," the manager said. "They're part of a pre-cleared diplomatic transport. Their routing is above your pay grade. Now, please step away before airport police are called." Keanu's voice remained calm. "You're hiding something, and you know it." The manager leaned in just enough for his words to be heard by them and no one else. You think you've stumbled into some righteous cause, Mr. Reeves, but this is not a movie. This is real-world logistics. And in the real world, you don't get to rewrite the rules just because something feels off, Steven replied with steel in his tone. You're right, this isn't a movie. Which means, if that girl disappears now, there's no reshoot. No director yelling cut, she's just gone. The man didn't answer. Instead, his fingers twitched toward the mic again. Keanu reached out slowly, not threatening, just pointing. Every time you touch that earpiece, someone moves. We saw it. The moment we arrived, you made the call. Now they're relocating her to a corridor you control. If nothing's wrong, why all the backdoor routing? The manager's voice stayed even, but his eyes betrayed flickers of irritation. I've given you every answer I'm required to give. Further interference from either of you will be treated as obstruction. Behind them, the two watchers were repositioning again. Blue Hoodie was moving casually toward the opposite end of the concourse, angling toward the maintenance wing. Magazine Man was no longer pretending to browse. He was on the move. Steven's phone buzzed. One line of text from his contact. Other two just entered service corridor from maintenance side. He showed it to Keanu without a word. Keanu's voice dropped to almost nothing. They're flanking. Secondary extraction path. If we wait, she's gone. Steven nodded. And if we act, we risk tipping them too soon. The operations manager took a step back, already retreating. I suggest you leave before you make a bigger mistake than you already have. The door behind him clicked shut, sealing the girl inside with men who weren't who they claimed to be. Steven's hands were still. Keanu's jaw clenched. And for the first time since they'd noticed the girl, the stakes no longer felt hypothetical. This was it. They had seconds, not minutes. One wrong decision, and she'd vanish into a system designed to make people disappear. Steven said quietly, We don't wait anymore. Keanu's eyes stayed on the door. We go. Keanu stepped toward the service door again, trying the handle. It didn't move. No give at all. Badge locked. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cold metal and exhaled, trying to think. Steven scanned the corridor behind them. No security, no staff, no backup. The operations manager was gone, vanished into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. The gate agent looked visibly shaken now, but she kept her eyes down and hands on her keyboard, pretending not to see any of it. Badge access only, Keanu muttered. Steven glanced down the hallway again. Then we find someone who has one. But they didn't have time to go hunting. Every second they stood there, the girl was being moved deeper into the maze. And with the other two handlers entering through different corridors, this wasn't a delay, it was a handoff. She was being routed like cargo. Keanu paced once, then stopped at the sound of squeaking wheels. A catering team rounded the corner, two young workers pushing a loaded metal cart stacked with wrapped sandwiches, trays of fruit, and cases of bottled water. One of them swiped her badge and nudged the service door open with her shoulder. It clicked. Keanu moved. He stepped forward fast, but not aggressive, holding his hands where she could see them. Please, emergency. We need to follow someone who just went through there. A child is in danger. The girl hesitated, eyes wide. She looked at Steven, then back at Keanu. Recognition dawning slowly. Are you? Yes, Keanu said. And I need your help. She turned to her coworker, who looked like he'd already decided to keep walking. Do it, she said quietly. They're serious. The boy held the door open with one elbow. Keanu and Steven slipped through. The door clicked shut behind them. Instantly, the noise changed. The air was colder. The floor, under their shoes, wasn't polished tile anymore. It was concrete. Overhead, old fluorescent lights buzzed. The smell shifted too. Bleach, metal, the faint tang of jet fuel. The walls were bare, just pipes, conduit, and aging white paint. Keanu didn't wait. He took the lead, following the echoes. Footsteps. Not close, but not far. Steven followed at his side, eyes scanning for movement. A distant voice shouted something sharp in a foreign language, harsh syllables echoing off concrete. Steven looked at Keanu. That was a command. Keanu's mouth tightened. They're repositioning. They picked up speed, but not so fast as to draw noise. This wasn't the place for a sprint. It was the kind of corridor where sound carried too well, and a wrong echo could blow their chance. Keanu kept his steps controlled, eyes flicking between numbered doors. Some were slightly ajar storage rooms, electrical closets, break rooms for exhausted staff. Others were sealed tight. Overhead, exit signs flickered in tired green. Steven moved slightly ahead, scanning junctions where the corridor split. He motioned left, then stopped short. A cleaning cart blocked the hallway, abandoned near a wall-mounted utility sink. Mop bucket full. Freshly bleached floors. The smell hit strong. He stepped around it and pointed ahead. "See that?" he whispered. Keanu nodded. Scuff marks. Fresh. The trail led down a narrow turn where the walls constricted, forcing single-file movement. The air got colder here, older. There were no public-facing doors anymore, just staff-only markings and maintenance codes. Up ahead, the sound of hurried steps scraped the silence again. The rhythm told Keanu everything. The man wasn't walking. He was dragging someone. Steven confirmed it. Uneven gait. She's resisting. They reached a junction and paused just before turning the corner. Keanu tilted his head toward the sound. He held his breath, letting his ears do the work. Then, a burst of metal on metal rang out, a door slamming shut. Steven whispered, "They're close." They moved quickly now, turning the corner and entering a long corridor that ran along the airport's outer wall. Crates lined one side, some stacked, some broken down, and ready for disposal. The lighting was worse here. Half the bulbs flickered or buzzed with dying filaments. Far down the corridor, they saw movement. The handler, big shoulders, dark jacket. The girl clutched tightly in one arm, her feet dragging, not walking. Her bear was still in her arms, her head against it like a shield. Her legs moved, but it was the kind of motion that didn't come from choice. Keanu felt the pressure rise in his chest. "We're running out of corridor," he said. Steven nodded. "They're pushing for extraction." The man took a sharp turn through a set of double gray doors at the end, the kind with no windows. They hissed open and closed fast. Keanu picked up the pace, footsteps faster now, breath steady, every sense locked in. When they reached the doors, Steven pressed his fingers to the seam. Warm. They'd just gone through. He reached for the handle. It wasn't locked. Steven eased the door open just enough for a narrow look. What lay ahead was a wider hallway with industrial lighting, low, yellow, and uneven. The space opened into a loading apron, where the roar of jet engines rumbled through the walls like distant thunder. They were near the tarmac. Keanu slipped through the doorway behind him. No hesitation now. Far down the corridor, the handler was visible again, faster now, pulling the girl across the threshold of a side exit toward open air. His movements were urgent. This wasn't a controlled walk anymore. It was extraction. The girl's legs kicked once, but weakly. She was tired, or frightened, or both. Her arms were locked around the bear. Her face was buried in its side. To the left, one of the other watchers reappeared, merging from a side corridor. He fell in behind the main handler, looking over his shoulder once and then giving a short nod forward. Steven's voice was low. "They're converging outside." Keanu checked behind them. No footsteps, no one coming. Just the cold concrete and the echo of something that felt final. They pushed forward. The next set of doors led directly into a supply corridor, with wide rubber flaps hanging from a ceiling-mounted track. A set of orange safety cones had been kicked to the side. A trail of fresh scuff marks dragged across the floor, dark rubber from frantic shoes. Then came the first burst of daylight. Keanu hit the exit bar on the final door. Sunlight spilled into their eyes. Heat followed. Jet fuel hung in the air like a veil. On the tarmac, equipment hummed. A yellow baggage tractor idled to the left. A catering truck pulled away from a loading ramp. No one noticed two men dragging a girl toward a white airport van with tinted windows waiting beside a chain-link fence. The third handler, blue hoodie, had already opened the rear door. He looked back, saw Keanu and Steven, and froze. That split second mattered. Steven moved first. The handler hesitated, then yanked the van door harder and shoved the girl inside. The bear dropped to the ground, but she scrambled after it, clutching it before disappearing into the dark interior. Keanu broke into a run. The main handler jumped into the driver's seat. The engine revved. Steven reached for the license plate, blank. No medallion, no fleet ID. The van began to lurch forward. Keanu sprinted, closing the gap. But the tires screamed, and the van shot forward, cutting hard toward a break in the fencing where 2 airport carts had been rolled aside. They were going to vanish. Steven turned to the right, eyes scanning. A catering cart, keys in the ignition. He looked at Keanu. Without a word, they ran for it. Steven ran low and fast across the tarmac, weaving past a stationary fuel truck and the edge of a maintenance platform. The van had already disappeared through the fence gap. Only a trail of swirling dust marked its path now. But Steven wasn't watching the van anymore. He saw movement to the left. Not just one figure, 3. The main handler had stopped short of the service road that led to the rear of the airport compound. There, near a battered yellow loading gate, a second vehicle idled, a taxi. Not one of the standard airport fleet. No markings, no medallion. Just a white sedan with a roof light that looked more like a prop than a permit. The driver leaned against the side, checking his phone, unaware. The handler pulled the girl toward it, fast and rough now. Her feet dragged, her body jolted with each step. The bear was gone. Dropped somewhere in the rush. Steven grabbed Keanu's arm, pointed. There. Keanu's eyes locked in. The girl's small frame jolted as she was pulled toward the car. Her arms flailed once. She tried to pull free. Her resistance was slow, weak, but real. Wide, Keanu said, veering left. They split without another word. Steven cut right, trying to flank the vehicle. But then 2 more figures emerged from opposite directions, one from behind a utility shed, the other from the far end of the tarmac service lane. Reinforcements. The one on the right moved with purpose, angling toward the taxi like he already knew the route. The second jogged toward a side gate, opening a service door and waving. It was a diversion. The main handler reached the taxi, grabbed the driver by the collar, and yanked him out in one hard motion. The driver shouted in protest, stumbling backward. His phone flew from his hand and skidded across the asphalt. Before the man could recover, the handler opened the rear door, shoved the girl inside, and slammed it shut behind her. Then he rounded the front of the vehicle and slipped into the driver's seat. Keanu was still 30 yards out. Steven shouted, but the taxi was already pulling forward, gravel crunching under its tires as it headed toward the open runway access road. Keanu scanned the tarmac. They needed wheels. Fast. He spotted a black SUV parked near a security trailer, engine running, driver seated with a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and a walkie-talkie on the dash. He didn't hesitate. Keanu sprinted toward the SUV, weaving past a set of orange cones and a stack of folded luggage carts. The vehicle was parked at an angle, hazard lights blinking lazily. The driver looked up just as Keanu reached him, startled, his sandwich frozen halfway to his mouth. Keanu held up both hands in a non-threatening gesture, his breath steady despite the sprint. "Sir," he said firmly, "a child's been taken. She's in that white taxi, heading for the outer perimeter. We need your vehicle, right now." The worker blinked, unsure if it was a prank or something worse. Before he could object, Steven appeared beside Keanu, flipping open a worn leather wallet and flashing a weathered ID from one of his humanitarian organizations. It wasn't a badge, but it carried weight. And more than that, his tone did. Child trafficking. Active. We're not guessing. The man's eyes darted toward the service road. The taxi was already 100 yards ahead, accelerating. Steven's voice dropped. "Please. We'll return the car. You have my word." The ramp worker hesitated for one more breath, then nodded. "Take it." He threw the door open and stepped back, hands raised. "Go." Keanu slid into the driver's seat, Steven jumping into the passenger side before the doors could close behind them. Keanu threw the SUV into gear, tires squealing as he pulled out in a tight arc. The engine roared, surging forward as they hit the access road. Ahead, the taxi was threading between baggage trolleys and catering trucks, moving faster now, its tail bouncing with every dip in the uneven asphalt. It wasn't just escaping. It was following a route, one that had been planned in advance. Keanu leaned forward, eyes locked on the shrinking speck ahead. "They're heading for a private gate," Steven said, bracing himself with one hand on the dashboard. "Probably a back exit to the city route. If they clear that fence, we lose them." Keanu adjusted the wheel, weaving through a narrow path beside a refueling station. "Then we don't let them clear it." The SUV picked up speed, the suspension bucking slightly as they hit a dip, then surged forward. In the rearview mirror, the airport terminal was fading fast, replaced by maintenance hangars and gravel shoulders. Keanu's hands were calm on the wheel. Steven was already pulling out his second phone, trying to reconnect with local dispatch. But Keanu knew in his gut, whatever system had let that man walk her through a gate unchecked, it wasn't going to help them now. The taxi took a hard right past a maintenance shed and darted toward the narrow opening in the fence line. 2 sliding panels had been pushed aside just enough space to allow a vehicle through. No markings, no guards, only tire tracks in the dust. Keanu followed, cutting across a diagonal path that forced the SUV over a rise in the pavement. The undercarriage groaned, but the vehicle held steady. Steven tightened his grip on the handle by the window. They burst through the fence line seconds later. The SUV's rear tires kicked up gravel and dust in a wide arc. As Keanu straightened out the wheel, the city skyline loomed ahead, blurred by heat shimmer. The road was a cracked industrial access lane that ran behind cargo facilities and supply warehouses. To their left, a faded row of freight containers. To the right, open tarmac and high fences, all of it humming with hidden energy. Steven peered through the windshield. They're not just running, they're being directed. Look how clean their path. Island. No. Obstacles. No traffic. Keanu's eyes didn't leave the road. Someone planned this route. Someone inside. The taxi was about 4 car lengths ahead now, swerving slightly to avoid a puddle left by a leaky utility pipe. It veered again and darted into a side alley between 2 warehouse buildings, tires screaming against the pavement. Keanu hit the brakes, just long enough to keep traction, then followed. The alley narrowed, walls pressing in from both sides. Trash bins and old pallets lined the sides. The sun disappeared as they entered the shadows. Visibility dropped, and every sound became sharper. Steven checked the side mirror. No backup. We're still alone. "Then, it's just us," Keanu said. The SUV cleared the alley and spilled out into a long, empty service yard behind a warehouse. A line of unmarked delivery trucks sat parked in the far lot. The taxi was cutting toward them, using the gaps between the trucks as cover. The driver wasn't reckless. He was calculating. He was buying time. Steven leaned forward, eyes scanning the windows of the taxi. He caught a flash of movement. The girl. Her silhouette was slumped in the back seat, her small figure barely visible through the tinted glass. "No more bear. No more fight. Just motionless fear." Keanu gritted his teeth. "He's using the trucks as visual cover. We can't lose the angle." Steven pointed. "Stay left. Stay wide. Keep eyes on the rear window." Keanu nodded and adjusted the trajectory, keeping to the perimeter. The SUV hugged the far edge of the lot. Dust swirled behind them. The engine strained but held. Every second counted. Then the taxi made its move. It burst from between the trucks, crossing the yard toward another gate, this one locked with a chain and padlock. Without slowing, the driver veered into the barrier, smashing through the gate. Metal clanged against pavement as the lock snapped and flew across the yard. "He's going off-road," Steven said. "Not if I can help it," Keanu answered. He gunned the engine. This chase wasn't just about speed anymore. It was about not losing her again. The broken gate clattered behind them as Keanu pressed the accelerator, the SUV surging forward in a burst of torque and gravel. Ahead, the taxi tore across the uneven ground, tires bouncing through potholes, its rear end fishtailing slightly before straightening out. The driver knew where he was going. Every turn had been calculated. Every corner pre-cleared. Steven leaned forward, bracing against the dashboard, eyes scanning for visual markers. "He's heading toward the airport service perimeter," he said. That gravel road loops around to the old cargo runway. Keanu nodded, barely blinking. He's not improvising. This is part of their route. As they hit the paved edge of the perimeter road, the SUV jolted, its wheels catching better grip. Keanu steered with subtle corrections, gliding the vehicle along the outer curve of the fence line. A row of freight containers blurred past them on the right, while the service road stretched ahead like a fading ribbon of gray. Up ahead, the taxi made a sudden left, cutting across the empty lot and hopping the shallow curb onto the service road. It was a risky move. The tires thudded hard. Sparks flew from the undercarriage as it bottomed out, but the driver didn't slow. "He's trying to get to the city exit," Steven muttered. "If he hits the 405, we lose too much ground." Keanu's hands tightened around the wheel. Not happening. Steven pulled out his phone again and tapped the contact for California Highway Patrol. The call rang once, then died. He tried again, this time using a different emergency line. The same result. Silence, then static, then disconnect. He frowned and switched to another phone, one with a secure channel. Nothing. Static again. And then, call failed. Steven looked up. They're jamming the signal. Keanu didn't react, but his jaw tightened, which means this isn't local. This is funded. Steven tried a final call using a satellite bridge. It connected for neither. 3 seconds, then cut out again. He put the phone down, hard. Someone's actively scrambling any outgoing signal from this area. Keanu's voice was quiet. Then we're not just chasing a kidnapping. Steven's tone dropped. We're chasing a system. The SUV followed the path the taxi had taken, hugging the inside lane as it approached the final turn before the airport boundary road ended. Just ahead, the white taxi slipped through a gap in the fencing and took the on-ramp toward the I-405. Keanu didn't blink. We're not letting her disappear. The SUV surged forward as Keanu took the ramp without slowing. The tires screamed but held. Concrete barriers on either side blurred past as they climbed the incline, chasing the vanishing taillights of the taxi. They crested the ramp and merged onto the I-405 northbound, the wide freeway already buzzing with late afternoon traffic. It was the worst place to lose visual: multiple lanes, variable speeds, a dozen possible exits. But the taxi hadn't vanished yet. Steven spotted it half a mile ahead, weaving through the middle lanes, its driver forcing space where none existed. The car ducked behind a delivery truck, then darted into the fast lane. Keanu changed lanes with precision. No wasted motion, no overcorrection. He'd done stunt driving for film, but this wasn't a controlled track. This was real. Every driver around them was unpredictable. Every decision had to land clean. Steven was already trying alternate routes. His tablet glowed faintly on his lap, showing GPS data, camera feeds, and congestion patterns. But even those started to flicker. "Surveillance feeds going black," he muttered. "Traffic cams are being cut in real time. They've got access to municipal systems." Keanu nodded grimly. Whoever's running this isn't small. Steven tried another call on a buried emergency frequency. It rang. Then the signal distorted and vanished. He looked over at Keanu. This chase isn't just about her anymore. If we don't stop that car, nobody will. Keanu's voice was flat. Then we stop it. The SUV darted through a gap between a sedan and a shuttle bus, hugging the far left lane before switching over 2 lanes cleanly. The engine growled, not angry, focused. The taxi ahead braked sharply and swerved around a slower car, then bolted through a tight pocket of traffic, crossing into the far right lane near the next interchange. Steven pointed. "He's going for the 90, or maybe Sepulveda. He'll exit soon." Keanu adjusted course, eyes never leaving the speck of white metal slicing through traffic. Then something odd happened. A black SUV pulled into the far left lane behind them, holding position. Steven checked the side mirror. "We've got a tail." "Friend or foe?" Keanu asked. "Too early to tell," Steven replied. "But he's pacing us." Keanu pressed forward, narrowing the gap to the taxi. The girl's shape was still barely visible in the rear window. 4 car lengths, Steven whispered, then 3. Keanu's hands never shook. They just kept moving forward. The freeway opened for a moment, and Keanu used it. He dropped the SUV into a lower gear, gave it a burst of speed, and narrowed the distance to just 2 car lengths. The taxi's driver looked in the mirror and noticed. The vehicle shifted left suddenly, cutting in front of a van, then veered right again in a zigzag motion meant to shake pursuit. It didn't work. Keanu stayed right with him. Steven's gaze locked on the taxi's rear window. The girl had moved, her face pressed against the glass, just for a second. Not crying, not screaming, just looking. Still silent. Still clutching the worn shape of her teddy bear like it was armor. Then she vanished again, pulled down roughly. Keanu's voice was calm but cold. They're hiding her. They know we're close. Ahead, an exit sign loomed La Tijera Boulevard. The taxi shot toward it, ignoring the lane markings, cutting across the gore point and hitting the off-ramp at full speed. The turn was tight, dangerously fast. The rear of the car swerved, but the driver corrected just in time. Keanu followed. The SUV hit the ramp, tires screeching. Dust rose around them as they curved down to street level. Traffic lights flickered in the distance. This part of the city was quieter, with wide intersections and low buildings. Still industrial, still remote enough to make people vanish. Steven glanced back again. The black SUV from earlier had followed them off the freeway. It kept distance but stayed in sight. "We're still being watched," he muttered. "Then they're either backup or the next problem," Keanu replied. The taxi blew through the first red light. Horns blared. A compact car screeched to a halt, inches from collision. Keanu avoided the same light by inches, cutting through it diagonally and swinging around a corner where the taxi had turned. The chase bled into a series of tight side streets, each one narrower than the last. Rows of fenced-in lots, closed auto shops, vacant storage yards, a maze of escape routes, too many places to disappear. Steven tried his phone one more time. Nothing. He stared at the screen and shook his head. "They're still scrambling all emergency channels. We're on our own." Keanu responded without looking. "Then we end this on our terms." The taxi made a sharp right between 2 buildings, entering a lot filled with stacked shipping containers. It was familiar. It felt too familiar. Steven's eyes widened. "It's a yard. They're going to lose us in there." Keanu didn't slow, unless we don't give them time to try. They shot through the opening just as the taxi disappeared around a rusted blue container. Shadows deepened. The air thickened with dust and the scent of oil. "This is where they plan to vanish," Steven said. "Then this is where we catch them," Keanu answered. He tightened his grip on the wheel and kept going. The shipping yard gave way to a narrow access road, jagged with potholes and gravel sprays. The taxi emerged from the far end, tires spitting rocks as it gunned toward a makeshift on-ramp leading back to the freeway. Keanu didn't hesitate. He followed, the SUV jolting over uneven ground, suspension screaming in protest. Back on the highway, the traffic had thickened. Midday congestion was turning into afternoon gridlock. The taxi driver didn't care. He pushed through anyway, slipping between semis and weaving across lanes like he'd done this before. Steven's knuckles gripped the dash. Keanu leaned forward, eyes locked. "He's trained," Keanu muttered. "That's not a panic driver. That's someone who knows how to disappear." Steven tapped the screen of his phone again. Dead. He switched to another device, one of his private channels. Scrambled. Even emergency bypass wasn't getting through. "Every signal's still jammed," he said. "They've got a wide net running. This goes way deeper than airport security." The SUV darted into a gap, then back out to the shoulder. Keanu drove like water fluid, patient, but forceful when needed. He wasn't just chasing. He was reading. Reading the curves, the gaps, the mind of the man ahead. Steven watched as the taxi tried to pull a fast merge onto a frontage road, cutting off a delivery truck and nearly scraping the guardrail. Keanu mirrored the move, slipping into the same tight path and holding position 3 cars behind. Then they hit a tight corner. A group of pedestrians stepped onto the crosswalk. A woman pushing a stroller. A man holding the hand of a little boy. The taxi didn't slow. Keanu's breath caught. His foot slammed the brake. Tires screamed. The SUV jerked sideways, missing the stroller by a whisper. The mother screamed. The child's eyes widened in shock. The father froze. Steven's heart thundered in his chest. They cleared the corner just in time. The family left trembling on the common sidewalk behind them. Keanu's voice was low. "This isn't just a pursuit, it's a rescue." Steven nodded silently. This wasn't a movie. This was real life. And someone's life was on the line. And she was just a child. The taxi veered off again, this time taking a sudden turn into an industrial complex behind the freeway, an area known to locals but invisible to GPS navigation. Rows of warehouses and truck depots stretched across the horizon like a maze built for vanishing. Keanu kept his speed tight and deliberate, weaving through the sharp angles of the service roads without losing visual contact. "He's trying to lose us in the freight district," Steven said, glancing at a faded sign. "There's a decommissioned rail hub back here. No cameras, no patrol." Keanu's jaw tightened. The taxi shot past a cluster of parked trailers and made a hard right down a service alley barely wide enough for one vehicle. Keanu followed with surgical precision, his hands calm on the wheel. At the far end of the alley, the taxi jumped a low curb and re-entered the city grid through a hidden cut in a chain-link fence. Steven turned back in his seat to look behind them. No tail, no units, no signals. "We're completely on our own." Keanu didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the rear license plate of the taxi. He wasn't blinking. He was memorizing. A flash of movement. The back window of the taxi shifted barely. A pale hand appeared for a second. Small fingers spread against the glass. Then it vanished. "She's still conscious," Steven said. "She's trying to signal." Keanu's foot pressed down. The engine growled. The SUV surged forward. They were gaining. A junction appeared ahead, 3 streets converging into a narrow intersection. The taxi hesitated for half a second. Keanu saw it. He calculated. "He doesn't know which way to go," Keanu muttered. "Then let's decide for him," Steven said. Keanu angled the SUV slightly to the corner. Right, pressuring the taxi toward the leftmost road, a dead end they'd scoped earlier. The driver took the bait, swinging hard left, hoping to vanish between 2 long-forgotten warehouses. Steven checked the alley ahead. That road loops around to the rail yard. He's going to try to disappear inside. "We're not giving him that chance," Keanu replied. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Every second counted now. The girl was close, and they were running out of space. The road narrowed even further as the taxi dove into the abandoned rail yard. Rows of rusted train cars sat like sleeping giants, their graffiti-covered hulls casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. The asphalt here was cracked and uneven, dotted with weeds and oil stains. No streetlights, no eyes, no help. Keanu downshifted and kept his distance. Too close, and the driver might panic. Too far, and they'd lose him. Steven leaned forward, tracking the taxi through the maze of steel and silence. "He's going to try to transfer her," Steven said. "There's no reason to bring her this deep, unless there's another vehicle waiting." Keanu nodded. "Or a plane, or a train." They turned the next corner and slowed. The taxi had vanished. Gone. Keanu hit the brakes gently, easing the SUV to a crawl. Dust swirled in the air. Steven rolled down his window, listening. A metal clang echoed across the yard. 3 quick taps. Then, silence. Morse code. Steven's eyes widened. "That's not random," he whispered. "That's a signal." 3 short taps. The universal SOS. Keanu swung the wheel. They headed toward the sound. As they rounded the last corner, they saw her. The girl was being pulled out of the taxi by a different man, now taller, broader, dressed in a black jacket with no insignia. He gripped her arm tightly, scanning the shadows. Keanu cut the engine and coasted to a stop behind a derailed flat car. Steven reached for the glove box and retrieved a small, tactical flashlight and a folding baton. Keanu nodded. No guns, not here. Too risky. They stepped out in unison. The man hadn't seen them yet. He was speaking in low tones to someone through a headset. The original taxi driver stood off to the side, nervously pacing, eyes darting around like a man who knew he was in over his head. The girl looked exhausted, her body limp, one shoe missing. Her face turned toward the sound of Keanu's boots on gravel, their eyes locked, no hesitation. She yanked her arm free and bolted. The handler reached for her, but Steven was already moving. He intercepted the man mid-step, baton flashing upward into the man's ribs. The handler staggered. Steven pivoted and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. Keanu grabbed the girl, shielding her behind him. "It's okay. We've got you." Tears streamed down her face. She nodded rapidly, clutching his jacket. But they weren't done. The taxi driver made a run for it, disappearing between two boxcars. Keanu didn't chase. His focus was on the girl, on keeping her upright. She was trembling. Steven glanced around. This isn't over. Someone else is coming. Keanu turned. A black SUV was approaching from the far side of the yard, headlights off, engine silent. Too clean, too fast. Steven guided them toward a nearby loading ramp. "We need cover, now." They ducked behind a stack of cargo pallets as the black SUV rolled to a stop. 4 men stepped out. Earpieces, matching jackets, no badges, private security, number. "Too aggressive. Mercenaries." One of them shouted, "Hand over the girl, you have no jurisdiction." Keanu stepped forward slowly, arms visible, protective. "She's a child. She's not property." "You're interfering with a sanctioned transfer," the man replied coldly. Steven's voice was flat. "Sanctioned by who?" No answer. Keanu whispered to the girl, "When I move, run to that trailer and hide. Don't come out until I get you." She nodded. Then he moved, a blur of force. Keanu closed the distance between him and the closest man, disarming him with a precise strike to the wrist. Steven joined, flanking the group, forcing them back. It wasn't a full fight. It was controlled chaos. Moments later, the girl was gone, vanished into the safety of the trailer. Keanu and Steven stood back to back, surrounded by stunned men who hadn't expected resistance. One reached for a sidearm. Steven kicked it away. Keanu's voice was ice. "You're done." Sirens sounded in the distance. Real ones. Airport police. Finally responding. The men froze, then scattered. Keanu exhaled. Steven looked around the yard, catching his breath. "We're not just dealing with traffickers." "No," Keanu replied. "This goes deeper. This was protected, funded." Steven's phone finally buzzed to life, signal restored. A text came through from the contact Keanu had messaged earlier. 3 words. "You were right. They found the girl in the trailer, curled up under a tarp, eyes wide, but calm. This time, when Keanu reached for her hand, she didn't flinch. She took it, and didn't let go." The SUV turned off the main road and followed the taillights of the taxi as it slipped through a half-open security gate into a sprawling industrial zone. Rows of corrugated warehouses stretched into the haze, and just beyond them stood the stacked metal walls of a shipping container yard. Red, blue, yellow, silver, each container like a brick in a fortress built for confusion. Keanu downshifted. He's not trying to outrun us anymore. He's trying to lose us. Steven nodded slowly. He knows this yard. That means he's done this before. They passed a flickering sodium lamp and crossed into the maze. Towering crates flanked both sides, creating narrow corridors that echoed with the rattle of chains and the distant thud of loading machinery. The air here was thicker, heavier, holding secrets. The taxi swerved left, tires screeching slightly. Keanu followed, but eased up, slowing just enough to keep distance without revealing their line of sight. If we push too hard, he'll disappear into one of these lanes, and we'll never see him again. Steven opened his phone, switched to compass mode, and traced the movement of the vehicle on memory. "There's an old lift platform 3 rows east. If he wants to transfer cargo or people, that's where he'll go." Keanu nodded. "So we go around, force him into the trap." They turned right at the next junction. The narrow path between containers was barely wide enough for the SUV. Keanu's hands were calm on the wheel. This wasn't about speed now. It was about anticipation, about rhythm, about patience. The metal walls of the containers closed in around them. Steven kept his eyes moving, tracking glints of motion between the cracks. "He's zigzagging now," he muttered. "Trying to double back. Maybe there's a second vehicle waiting deeper in." Keanu looked ahead. No movement yet, just shadows and rust. "If this place has exits, they're not on the maps." Steven leaned forward. "That's what makes it perfect. It eats time and spits confusion." But Keanu didn't flinch. His jaw tightened. His eyes never left the narrowing path. Then, let's not give it time. They moved deeper into the maze. The SUV crept through the dim lanes, tires crunching over gravel and scraps of broken pallet wood. Keanu cut the headlights, leaving only the faint glow of security lamps scattered across the yard. They were close enough now that sound mattered more than sight. A sudden clang echoed through the steel maze, a container door slamming shut. Both men froze. Steven whispered, "That wasn't wind." Keanu slowly advanced, eyes darting between the rows. A flash of movement, just a shadow, vanished behind a corner. Another metallic slam, farther away this time. "He's creating a trail," Keanu said, voice low. "Decoys." Steven's eyes narrowed. "But we're not chasing noise. We're chasing instinct." He tapped a sequence on his phone, then pointed toward a set of tall containers stacked 3 high. Those were repositioned recently. See the dirt tracks? Fresh tire marks lead behind them. Keanu didn't speak. He simply turned the wheel and edged the SUV into the adjacent lane. There, half obscured by shadows, was the taxi. Its engine idled, front bumper dented from a prior scrape, but no driver, no girl. Steven's hand moved to the door handle, but Keanu stopped him. "Wait." They listened. A faint voice muffled, a whimper. It was coming from somewhere behind the container stacks. Keanu and Steven moved as one, stepping out, crouching low. The air smelled of diesel and rust. Somewhere nearby, a container door creaked on its hinge. A third man's voice, speaking hurriedly in a language neither of them recognized. Steven held up a finger, signaling 2 ahead, one moving fast, one dragging something. The men crept closer, using the maze to mask their approach. Every footstep was calculated, every breath measured. They reached the final corner. Steven peeked around and pulled back immediately. "They've got her in a blue container, halfway closed," he whispered. "One guy's guarding, other one's prepping a van about 30 feet behind." Keanu clenched his fists. "We cut the angle. You draw them left. I'll take the right." Steven nodded once. 3 seconds. "Then move." They counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then they split. Steven burst from cover first, his voice sharp and commanding. "Hey, step away from the girl." The guard near the container spun, startled, reaching into his coat. But Steven was already closing the distance. His presence alone disrupted the rhythm years of experience and raw authority carried in his posture. The second man near the van hesitated just a moment too long. That moment was all Keanu needed. He flanked from the right, moving silently along the stacked crates until he reached the blind spot behind the open container. He could see her now, the girl, huddled near the back wall, duct tape still around her wrists, fear wide in her eyes. "Stay down," Keanu mouthed silently, holding her gaze. Then everything moved at once. The man guarding the van drew a weapon, but Steven was already there, slamming the container door into him with a brutal thud. The first man lunged toward Keanu, knife drawn. Keanu sidestepped, grabbed a rusted length of pipe from the ground, and used it to knock the weapon free. A struggle followed fast, desperate, brutal. The handler struck Keanu across the ribs, but Keanu didn't fall back. He took the blow, absorbed it, then countered with a jab to the throat and a sweeping kick that sent the man crashing into a crate. Winded, down, Steven finished securing the second man, zip-tying his wrists with flex cuffs he carried in his coat. Got him. Keanu was already at the girl's side, pulling gently at the tape. "You're safe now. You hear me? We've got you," he said, voice soft as spite. The adrenaline still pumping through him. She nodded, tears streaming, her mouth trembling as she whispered the first clear word in hours. "Thank you." They didn't linger. Keanu carried her as Steven cleared a path back to the SUV. The container yard was still, silent. No more footsteps, no more shouts, just breathing, heartbeats, and the knowledge that they weren't done yet. As they climbed into the vehicle, Keanu glanced at Steven. They weren't planning to stop here. Steven nodded grimly. "This was just a pit stop." Keanu checked the girl in the mirror. "Then we keep moving." The tires shrieked against the asphalt as the taxi veered hard left, clipping a low concrete curb that lined the edge of the yard. One front tire exploded with a deafening pop, rubber whipping violently as the rim dug into the pavement. Sparks flew. The vehicle jerked sideways, metal groaning, and slammed into a narrow channel between two towering shipping containers. The nose of the car lodged against the steel wall, wedged at an angle that left the rear doors trapped against the narrow lane. The handler wasted no time. He kicked open the front door and leapt out, dragging the girl from the back seat with one hand and brandishing a long, serrated knife in the other. She stumbled behind him, arms barely functional from the restraints, lips quivering as her shoes scraped against the gravel. He held her like a shield, the blade trembling near her cheek as he scanned his surroundings in panic. Keanu and Steven were on foot now, closing in from behind, hearts pounding but feet measured. They didn't run. They didn't shout. There was no room for chaos. The handler's chest heaved as he saw them. His eyes darted to the exits, the corners, the sky. There was nowhere left to go. Keanu stopped first, a few yards away, hands empty, voice calm. "This doesn't have to end like this," the man snarled, pulling the girl tighter against his chest. The knife's edge kissed the delicate skin beneath her chin. She whimpered. Steven took a half step forward, but Keanu held out a hand. "Not now." "I know what this is," Keanu said softly. "You were promised something. Maybe money, maybe power, maybe someone said no one would get hurt, but here we are." The handler's hands were shaking now, not from weakness, but from confusion. Everything had gone wrong. The silent extraction, the quick exit, the getaway route. It had all crumbled. "You think this girl is leverage," Keanu continued. "But you're holding something human, someone's daughter, someone's whole world." The handler tightened his grip, pressing the knife closer. The girl's eyes widened, breath caught in her throat. Keanu's voice didn't rise. "You don't have to do this." Steven slowly circled to the side, boots crunching over gravel, his movements deliberate. His eyes never left the handler, but his presence didn't challenge its surrounded. The man felt it, pressure without force, walls without threat. His pulse quickened, but there was no escape route now, only choices. "You've already lost," Steven said quietly. "But you haven't lost everything. You can still walk away without her blood on your hands." The handler flinched. The words hit something deeper than fear. Regret, confusion, the kind of moral rot that takes time to surface. He looked down at the girl. Her eyes were shut now, lips moving in silent prayer, shoulders trembling. For the first time, he saw her not as cargo, not as leverage, but as a child. Keanu inched closer. His voice remained steady. "Let her go. Just let her go. You and I, we both know you weren't born for this. You were made into it. Maybe by desperation. Maybe by someone who told you this was the only way to matter." The handler's grip loosened, just slightly. His arm twitched. The knife lowered a half inch. "Let her go," Keanu said again, now just steps away. A shadow passed overhead, a bird or a plane. No one knew, but it shifted the light just enough for the girl's face to catch a warm glow. Her tear-streaked cheek shimmered in the sun. She opened her eyes. They locked onto Keanu's, and that was the moment. The handler saw it too, the trust, the surrender, the impossible belief that someone, somehow, would not let her die today, that she was worth saving, that even strangers in an ugly world would fight for her soul. Keanu stopped moving. He breathed once. In, out. Steven stood still, hands low, his presence solid as stone. The handler's hand shook. The knife trembled in the cool air. A drop of sweat slid down his forehead. He blinked once, then twice. Every breath was a battle. Finally, his fingers opened. The blade dropped to the ground. It hit with a hollow clink that echoed through the container walls like a bell tolling in the distance. The girl collapsed forward into Keanu's arms the instant the knife hit the ground. He caught her gently, shielding her with his body, as if the very air around her needed filtering. Her sobs were soundless at first, then came in waves, sharp, broken gasps of release. Her body shook against his chest, and Keanu held her tighter, murmuring soft reassurances that weren't meant to be words, just presence. Steven moved in and swiftly kicked the blade away, then crouched beside the handler, who had fallen to his knees like a man suddenly aware of gravity. The weight of his choices crushed down on him, heavier than any weapon. He didn't resist, didn't speak. His eyes, once cold and calculating, were now hollow, empty. Somewhere inside, the war was over. Sirens echoed in the distance. They weren't far now. Steven didn't bother calling them in again. He just nodded toward Keanu, who was walking the girl slowly toward the open lot beyond the containers. She couldn't stand on her own yet, so he carried most of her weight, one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees. Each step was careful, measured, like walking through the remnants of a collapsed world. The girl looked up at him once, lips trembling. "You came," she whispered. Keanu's voice was quiet. "Of course we did." The handler didn't move when the police arrived. He didn't run, didn't argue. The moment had passed. It was as if surrender had seeped into his bones. One of the officers handcuffed him without resistance. Another called in for child protection. The entire yard now buzzed with movement, lights, orders. But Keanu kept walking until he reached the edge of the chaos. There, by a rusted fence, he sat down on the curb with the girl still in his arms. Steven joined him, wordless, crouching nearby. For a moment, none of them said anything, because sometimes the absence of noise is the loudest part of a rescue. Sometimes, the silence that follows survival carries more meaning than any speech ever could. And in that silence, 3 people, broken, bruised, but breathing, waited for what came next. The space around them shrank to a single breath, a single heartbeat. Steven took one slow step forward and began speaking in a language the handler wasn't expecting. Not English. Not the clipped commands of law enforcement. It was softer, older, and it cut through the tension like a whisper inside a storm. The handler stiffened. Steven didn't raise his voice. He kept it steady, almost like a memory being handed back to a man who had forgotten what mercy felt like. Keanu didn't interrupt. He took a small, measured step to the left, no threat in his movement, just a slight shift in presence. The goal wasn't to intimidate, it was to surround, to anchor. The girl's face remained frozen, eyes wide but tearless. Her fingers were locked tight around the bear, holding it not like a toy but like a lifeline, a thread back to a world where monsters weren't real. She didn't speak, but she didn't scream either. The handler responded, his voice louder this time, rough, defensive. He barked something sharp in return, something guttural. The blade pressed tighter to the girl's neck, enough to draw a thin red scratch. Just a warning, not yet a wound. Keanu's jaw clenched. Steven didn't back down. He kept speaking in the same calm tone, threading sorrow and familiarity into every word. He wasn't trying to negotiate. He was reaching into the cracks of whatever was left of the man who held that knife. "Where you're going," Steven said softly. "They'll forget your name, but she will remember this moment. Always." That made the handler flinch. Keanu took another quiet step. One more breath closer. His hands were empty, palms loose at his sides, but his gaze never wavered from the girl's face. Not the blade, not the man, just her. The handler's grip shifted slightly, a momentary uncertainty. A crack in the rhythm. Steven reached down, picked up a piece of rusted metal, and without a word, threw it hard against the nearest shipping container. It struck an air valve. The deafening horn blast echoed through the yard like a lightning strike. And in that split second of chaos, Keanu moved. Keanu didn't sprint. He flowed. His motion was clean, instinctual, the kind of movement that came from decades of fight choreography and real-world awareness fused together in one singular moment. The sound of the air horn hadn't even finished reverberating before he reached the handler. The man jerked the knife. But Keanu was faster. He didn't go for the weapon. He went for the man's balance. A twist of the handler's wrist, a subtle shift in weight, and the knife skidded across the concrete. Keanu didn't punch. He didn't kick. He wrapped his arms around the man and pinned him with a force that was more restraint than violence. His grip was unshakable, but controlled. Steven rushed in, pulling the girl gently away and scooping her into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just buried her face into his jacket and clutched the bear between them. Keanu held the handler pinned against the container wall, his breath steady. The man thrashed once, then twice, then stopped. There was no anger in Keanu's eyes, just the quiet of someone who'd seen too many endings. "You were going to trade her," Keanu said, voice low. "She's not a shipment. She's a child." The man didn't respond. Steven walked the girl a few feet back, checking her neck. The scratch was shallow, but the fear had run deep. He placed his hand gently on her head, whispering something in the same language he'd spoken before. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The handler sagged in Keanu's grip. Sirens began to echo faintly from the distance reel this time. Not jammed, not hijacked. The cavalry was coming, but late. Always late. Steven turned and looked at Keanu. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Keanu slowly released the handler, who dropped to his knees, defeated. Then Keanu knelt too, not to the man, but to the girl. He stayed at eye level, giving her back her space, her control. "You're safe now," he said gently. "No one will ever take you again." The bear never left her hands. The girl's breathing slowed, no longer frantic, but still fragile. Steven knelt beside her and spoke again, softly, in the man's native language this time to her, a phrase of reassurance. A small nod from her confirmed she understood. Keanu turned his eyes to the handler, now lying on his side, wrists bound, chest rising with shallow, exhausted breaths. Whatever he'd been promised, money, protection, redemption, it was gone. All that remained was silence and the cold ground. But the quiet didn't last. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the container yard. Two men appeared plainclothes, moving like they belonged. One lifted a badge just high enough to flash, but not to prove. "We're with Homeland. The girl comes with us." Steven and Keanu didn't flinch. "She's part of an ongoing operation," the first man continued. "You've done your part. Let us take it from here." Keanu stepped in front of the girl. Steven said calmly, "You're not Homeland. Real agents don't show up 5 minutes late and expect strangers to clean up their mess." The second man made a mistake. He reached into his coat. Steven reacted fast, stripping the weapon from him and dropping him with a sweep. The first man backed off, hands raised. Red and blue lights washed over the yard. LAPD cruisers arrived, sirens cutting through the tense air. Uniforms flooded in, guns drawn. But the moment that followed shattered everything. A car screeched in behind the police. A woman leaped out, crying, screaming the girl's name. She wore no badge, no armor, just desperation. The girl looked up, eyes wide. Recognition bloomed across her face. She dropped the bear, and she ran. The woman fell to her knees, arms open. They collided in a sobbing, trembling embrace. Keanu turned away. Steven closed his eyes. A nearby officer, watching it all unfold, lowered his radio. They said it was a snatch and go, but this was something else. Steven nodded. It always island. Behind them, the girl's drawing crumpled and faded rested in the SUV. A mother, a daughter, a bear, now complete. Keanu didn't wait for a signal. The moment the blast from the air horn echoed across the container yard, he moved. Fast, direct, low to the ground. Years of stunt coordination kicked in, but this wasn't for show. It was instinct. It was life. The man flinched just enough. His grip on the girl's arm loosened, his head turning toward the sudden sound. And in that heartbeat of confusion, Keanu was on him. He slammed into the handler's side, driving them both hard into the gravel. The knife scraped across the metal floor as Steven stepped in, his boot catching the blade mid-slide and sending it skittering out of reach. The girl staggered back. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just froze. The handler fought with desperation, limbs thrashing under Keanu's weight. One elbow landed against Keanu's ribs. Another tried for his throat, but Keanu didn't strike back. He didn't shout. He simply used the man's momentum against him, turning him over, pinning his arms behind his back. His breathing stayed even. Steven knelt beside the girl, scanning her eyes, checking for blood. "You're safe," he said softly. "We've got you." Still, she didn't speak. Her lips trembled, her fists clenched, but no words came. The handler kicked again, bucking under Keanu. Steven reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of flex cuffs. He tossed them over. With one smooth motion, Keanu looped the cuffs around the man's wrists, cinching them tight behind his back. The man snarled, but the sound faded quickly into groans as Keanu drove a knee gently between his shoulder blades, keeping him still. Blood streaked the gravel from the handler's scraped cheek and the girl's leg, where the knife had grazed her. Nothing deep, but enough to tell the story. The girl finally moved, slowly, cautiously. And then she stepped toward Keanu. She dropped to her knees beside him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. No tears, no thank you, just the silent, trembling weight of a child who had seen too much and survived it anyway. Keanu's hand came up, steady against her back, and everything went still. Keanu didn't speak. He just held the girl while her arms tightened. She was trembling, her small body pressed into his shoulder, breath short and uneven. She clutched the stuffed bear tighter with one hand. It was torn now, one ear missing, the fabric stained with gravel dust. But she wouldn't let it go. Steven stepped back, his eyes sweeping the edges of the container yard. He scanned for movement, for shadows that didn't belong. The air was too quiet now, too still after the chaos. The handler groaned beneath Keanu, trying one last time to twist free, but it was over. The fight had drained from his body. Distant sirens cut through the silence. 3 sets, multiple vehicles. Steven tapped his earpiece again, just in case. Still scrambled, still nothing. Someone had wanted this off the books. No trace, no witnesses. But they hadn't planned for 2 men like this. They hadn't planned for eyes that noticed, or hearts that refused to look away. The girl finally pulled back. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked at Keanu as if seeing something she couldn't name. Maybe safety, maybe disbelief. Maybe for the first time in hours, hope. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It's over," he whispered. "You're okay now." Her head gave a small nod. Still not a word. Steven walked over slowly, crouching to her level. "What's your name?" She blinked. Then, after a pause, so long it seemed like it would never end, she whispered one word. "Sophia." Steven smiled, soft and warm. "That's a beautiful name." Sophia looked at him, her voice barely audible. "Are you good guys?" Keanu glanced at Steven. Steven smiled again, then nodded. "Today we are." She nodded slowly, as if deciding whether or not to believe it. The handler coughed behind them, blood mixed with gravel in his mouth. His eyes, wild with frustration, locked on Sophia. Steven moved instantly, standing between them, blocking the gaze, cutting the connection. "You lost," Steven said. "Not cruel, just certain." And for the first time, the handler lowered his head. He knew it too. Sophia turned slightly and tucked her face into Keanu's chest again. He didn't move. He let her decide how long to hold on, how long to feel safe in that stillness. Behind them, the sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to flash across the edges of the containers. 2 squad cars, 1 black SUV. Uniforms emerged first, followed by agents in plain clothes. Weapons drawn, voices sharp and fast. Keanu raised his hand slowly to signal peace. Steven stepped forward, showing empty hands. "She's safe," Steven said firmly. "The man behind us is the abductor." One of the agents nodded. Another knelt beside the handler and cuffed him tighter. He didn't resist. He just lay there, face to the dirt, jaw clenched, silence his only defiance. Paramedics rushed in. One tried to separate Sophia from Keanu, but she held tighter. Keanu looked at the medic and shook his head gently. "Give her a second," he said. The medic backed off, understanding. Steven walked a short distance and spoke quietly to one of the officers, explaining what had happened from the moment they left the airport. There were no cell signals, no cameras in the yard. Just tire tracks, damaged metal, a trembling girl, and 2 witnesses whose names meant something. An officer asked, "Was this planned?" Steven gave a quiet nod. "Highly coordinated. Someone scrubbed the networks. They didn't want her found." The officer's face changed. This wasn't just an abduction. It was part of something deeper. Keanu finally looked down at Sophia. "Can I carry you to the ambulance?" She nodded. He stood slowly, lifting her in his arms. She didn't weigh much, but the moment did. Steven followed behind as they walked, toward the waiting vehicle. Officers cleared the path. A medic opened the doors. Sophia glanced back one more time, eyes wide and wet. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Keanu looked into her eyes and gave the only answer that mattered. Yes. She smiled, just a little, and nodded. And for the first time since the airport, she let go of the bear. The container yard was no longer quiet. Red and blue lights bounced off the metal walls, turning the once shadowed alleys into a chaotic scene of flashing color. Dozens of agents were now sweeping the area: LAPD, federal task force officers, and plainclothes operatives with grim faces and silent coordination. The place had transformed from a labyrinth of silence to the epicenter of something much larger. Steven stood beside one of the officers, his arms crossed as he watched a team cordon off the area with yellow tape. Keanu leaned against a nearby stack of crates, eyes still watching the last place Sophia had stood. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The weight of everything they'd just been through hadn't even begun to settle. A young agent approached Steven holding out a tablet. "We need a full statement, sir, but first, can you walk us through the chase?" Steven nodded and began recounting the events, starting from the moment they saw the silent SOS signal. His voice was calm, clear, methodical. He didn't dramatize anything, just facts. But even the facts sounded unbelievable. The hacked signals, the vanishing taxi, the container maze, the tackle, the silence. Keanu joined him midway through the retelling, adding the details Steven couldn't see from his vantage point. Their synergy was unspoken, automatic. It was clear they weren't just bystanders, they had intervened with precision. Then came the noise from the outer yard: shouting, scuffling, handcuffs. 2 LAPD officers dragged someone through the entrance of the lot. A man in a gray airport vest, still wearing his LAX badge, his face pale with panic. Keanu's eyes narrowed. He recognized him. The terminal manager. The one who'd looked past Sophia, who'd waved off her fear with a smirk. He had tried to flee the scene, but he hadn't gotten far. Agents surrounded him now, going through his duffel bag. Inside were stacks of unmarked bills, multiple burner phones, and a leather folder, packed with fake IDs, some of them for children. One of the agents looked up at Steven. "This guy was on our radar, but we never had anything stick. He ran point for exit clearances, always clean on paper. Not anymore." Steven crossed his arms tighter as the agent spoke. He slipped under every scan, every audit. Always a ghost when we tried to pull anything. Keanu looked toward the container where the handler had been taken. The girl was now with a female officer, wrapped in a heavy brown coat, far too big for her frame. She still clutched the small teddy bear. Her knees were shaking, but her eyes, they were steady, like she knew something had shifted forever. A paramedic knelt beside her, gently checking her pulse. The girl didn't pull away. She only looked over toward Keanu, her lips parting for the first time in hours. No words, just that look, pure recognition, safety. Steven walked over, crouching beside her. He spoke softly, asking her name again. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lena," her voice barely audible. Steven nodded once and motioned to the paramedic to continue the checks. One of the federal agents approached Keanu with a sealed plastic bag. Inside was a child's passport, one of the fakes. It bore Lena's photo, but a different name. The agent shook his head. This was how they moved them, quietly, one child at a time, through staff access, terminal shortcuts, every loophole exploited. He lowered his voice. "We've been chasing this ring for almost 5 years. We knew they used airports, but they always stayed one step ahead, until tonight." Keanu stared at the badge, still clipped to the manager's vest. "All that power," he said quietly, "and no conscience." Another agent walked up with a laptop retrieved from the taxi. They had managed to power it up, dozens of encrypted folders. One of them labeled with a simple word, cargo. Inside were logs, names, routes, times, airport terminals. Each line represented a life. Steven took a long breath. So many. The agent beside them nodded, his face pale. "You two just cracked a network we've been tracking for years. This changes everything." Keanu's voice stayed low. "We didn't crack it." He nodded toward Lena. She did. And across the yard, the girl looked down at her hand. The same hand that had sent the silent signal. The hand that had saved her life. A light rain began to fall as dawn crept over the edge of the city skyline, painting the container yard in soft, silver light. Emergency vehicles started to peel away, one by one, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The chaos was over, but the gravity of what had been uncovered lingered in the air. Steven stood next to one of the agents who had unzipped a duffel bag filled with foreign currency and burner phones. The agent held up a bundle of passports, each with a child's face. Some were smiling. Others looked confused, like the photo had been taken in fear. He whispered, "We have no idea how many are still out there." Keanu stepped beside him, eyes heavy but calm. "We'll find them," he said simply. Lena, now wrapped in a second blanket, was sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance. She was eating a small cup of applesauce handed to her by a nurse. Her hands still trembled between bites, but she wasn't alone. A female officer stayed beside her, gently brushing her hair back and offering a quiet presence. Another officer approached with paperwork, nodding toward Keanu and Steven. "We'll need full statements, but not here. Let's get you both somewhere quieter." Steven glanced at Keanu. "Yeah," he said, "but just one more thing." They both walked over to Lena. Keanu knelt in front of her. She paused her applesauce and looked up. "You were brave," he said gently. "You saw a way out, and you took it. That signal you gave us, that saved your life. And maybe the lives of others too." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Steven leaned down beside him. "There's going to be a lot of people wanting to ask you questions, Lena. But for now, all you have to know is, you're safe." The girl nodded slowly. Keanu stood and looked toward the agents, still combing through evidence. "You think they'll believe her?" The lead agent replied, "They will. And if they don't, they'll believe you." Keanu didn't smile. He didn't need to. Lena's signal had been heard, and now, her story was just beginning. The sun had started to rise fully now, casting long golden beams across the edge of the shipping yard. The morning was still cool, but the heaviness in the air had begun to lift just a little. Keanu stood by the ambulance, his hand resting lightly on the girl's back. She hadn't moved from the spot. She hadn't said a word since they pulled her out of the handler's grip. But she hadn't let go of Keanu either. A woman approached wearing an FBI windbreaker. She moved slowly, her badge already out, voice gentle. "We've identified her. Her name is Mia, 8 years old. She went missing from San Diego 3 weeks ago." Steven stepped closer, brows raised. "San Diego?" "Yeah," the agent replied. "Amber Alert was issued the same night. Local leads went cold, but we're contacting her parents now. They're on their way." Keanu's gaze stayed on Mia, whose arms clung to his side like she was trying to become invisible in the folds of his jacket. He didn't say anything. He just crouched a little, making sure she didn't feel rushed. The agent lowered her voice again. "Mr. Reeves, we need to take her in for a medical wellness check. It's standard procedure. Trauma screening, evidence collection. We'll be gentle. We'll let her pick the doctor. But she really should go now." Keanu looked up slowly. "She chooses when," he said. The agent hesitated. "With all respect, she chooses when," he repeated. Calm, firm, not angry, but immovable. Steven didn't speak, but he stepped to Keanu's side in silent agreement. It wasn't about defiance. It was about trust hers. The girl still hadn't spoken, but her tiny hands clenched the sleeve of Keanu's coat a little tighter, her head pressed closer to his ribs. In that small motion was everything they needed to know. She didn't trust uniforms. She didn't trust rules, but she trusted him. The agent sighed, stepping back. "Okay, I'll give you a moment." Keanu turned slightly, crouching beside Mia again. "You don't have to speak, Mia," he said softly. "Just squeeze my hand when you're ready." She didn't squeeze. Not yet. But she didn't let go either. Steven stood a few paces away, arms crossed, eyes scanning the perimeter. The adrenaline of the chase had faded, but the protective tension in his shoulders remained. He wasn't watching for danger anymore. He was watching over her, and over Keanu. Agents moved carefully in the background, out of the girl's line of sight. They spoke in hushed tones, organizing evidence, securing files, radioing updates. But none approached the pair again, not until Mia was ready. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. Keanu stayed beside her the entire time, not saying much, just letting her breathe. She held the teddy bear like it was a shield, her face still pressed into Keanu's side. A paramedic approached slowly, holding a cup of warm water. He knelt quietly and set it on the ground next to them without a word, then backed away. Keanu noticed, gave him a nod of thanks, and turned to Mia again. "That water's for you," he whispered. "Only if you want it. No one's gonna make you." Mia's head turned slightly, her cheeks still resting against him. Her eyes were red, puffy, but alert. She looked at the cup, then at Keanu, and then barely a small nod. She reached for the water with one hand while keeping the other tightly clenched around his sleeve. Steven saw it. He exhaled. That was something. Not much, but enough to know she was still in there, still fighting. Keanu watched as she sipped, hands trembling. She didn't spill, but she took only 2 sips before setting it down again. A female agent, softer in demeanor, slowly approached. This one knelt several feet away, giving space. "Hey Mia, my name's Elena. I'm a friend. You don't have to come with me, but I can take you to a quiet place with soft blankets and cartoons and pancakes if you want." Mia didn't respond, but her eyes flicked to Keanu. He nodded once, still crouched at her level. "You'll be okay, and I'll be right behind you. You decide when." The girl looked down at her bear. Her fingers stroked the matted fur. Then finally she stood, not alone, still clutching Keanu's hand, but standing. Steven stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as Keanu and Mia walked toward the waiting SUV. The rear seats had been folded down, replaced with a padded mattress, fleece blankets, and a small stuffed rabbit someone had quickly placed beside a bottle of apple juice. No one rushed them. No one even spoke. Keanu helped Mia into the back gently, not lifting her, letting her climb in on her own. Her tiny frame moved slowly, cautiously. When she sat down, she looked around once, then back at Keanu. He leaned down and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're brave. You know that?" She didn't smile, but she looked at him a second longer than before, like the words were still echoing in her chest. The female agent, Elena, climbed in beside Mia, giving her plenty of space. She didn't close the door yet, just waited. Gave her time to feel okay. Steven turned to Keanu. "They're flying her parents in by chopper. She'll be reunited within the hour." Keanu nodded, still watching Mia. "That's good, but for her, this isn't over in an hour." "No," Steven said. "But she's not alone now." Elena gently offered the rabbit to Mia. The girl reached for it, holding it beside the bear. Keanu exhaled. Not relief, not yet, but something close. He stepped back as the SUV doors finally closed. The engine hummed. The vehicle didn't rush. It moved slowly, respectfully, out of the yard. For the first time since the day began, there was silence. Keanu stood in the dust, the echo of tires on gravel fading behind him. His knuckles were raw, shirt torn near the shoulder, eyes tired but wide awake. Steven came to stand beside him. "You know what she did in that terminal?" he asked. "That hand signal, that saved her life." Keanu nodded. "That signal, it saved more than hers." Steven looked at him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "I'm thinking that if one girl in danger knew what to do, maybe others can too." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. But the mission wasn't over. Not even close. The helicopter landed on a distant patch of tarmac under the watch of 2 black SUVs and 3 agents holding perimeter. The air was still thick with heat and dust from the earlier chaos, but this moment felt untouched, hushed by something deeper than protocol. Keanu stood off to the side beside Steven, both of them silent, both watching. Neither needed to speak now. They had done what they came to do. What mattered now was who came next. The rotors slowed. A man and woman rushed out before the blades even fully stopped. The woman's legs buckled as soon as she saw the small girl stepping out of the SUV, rabbit in one hand, the little teddy bear in the other. Mia's eyes locked on the woman, and that was all it took. Her mother collapsed to her knees mid-run, hands trembling, mouth open but no sound coming out. It was the kind of silence that screamed. Mia didn't hesitate. She walked forward, steady, as if her feet already knew where they were going. No fear now, no confusion, just gravity. The kind only love creates. When they reached each other, there was no drama, no flailing, no crying. Mia stepped into her mother's arms, like she was slipping back into the place she belonged. Her father knelt down beside them, wrapping both of them in his arms, burying his face in his daughter's tangled hair. He didn't cry. He shook. The agents turned away politely. Even Elena stepped back. But Keanu didn't move. He watched. He needed to see this part. All of it. Steven folded his arms, eyes locked on the scene. "This is the only thing that makes any of it worth it," he said quietly. "Not headlines, not cases closed. That." Keanu nodded. "You fight through chaos, filth, corruption, for one moment like that." Mia didn't speak. She just clung tighter, her eyes finally fluttering shut in her mother's arms. Her little rabbit fell to the asphalt. Her father picked it up and tucked it back into her hand without a word. They stayed like that for a long time, one small circle in a wide-open yard. Keanu and Steven didn't walk away immediately. They gave it space. But they didn't disappear. One of the federal agents approached with gentle footsteps. He was young, early 30s maybe, clearly moved by what he'd witnessed. He held a clipboard and a small envelope standard paperwork, probably a DNA confirmation and custody verification. But when he got within 20 feet, he stopped. He saw what was happening, and he knew it wasn't time. He turned, walked back to the others, and said something under his breath. No one objected. No one pressed. Sometimes policy needed to wait. The air had shifted from tension to release, from chaos to stillness. The kind of stillness that only comes when fear drains out of the body and is replaced by safety. It was like watching someone wake up from a nightmare and realize the morning had finally come. Mia's father eventually pulled back just enough to look at her. His hand shook as it moved a strand of hair from her forehead. "We never stopped looking," he whispered, loud enough for only her and her mother to hear. The girl didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her mother just kept rocking her, repeating the same words softly, again and again. "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe." Steven finally turned to Keanu. "We should give them the yard." Keanu didn't argue. He nodded once, eyes still locked on the family. "Yeah, let them breathe." They stepped back, walking slowly toward the far side of the shipping containers, past the marked vans and the teams collecting evidence. It was like fading out of a scene they were never meant to own, only guard, only guide. On the way, they passed Elena, who was coordinating logistics with another federal officer. She glanced up. "Her name's Mia," she said. "Taken from her front yard in San Diego. Broad daylight, 3 weeks ago." Steven stopped. 3 weeks. She was moved 3 times, Elena continued. Different holding houses, different cars. But the stuffed rabbit she kept that the whole time. Wouldn't let it go. That's how her father recognized her photo so fast. Keanu exhaled slowly. The rabbit was her tether. "She's one of the lucky ones," Elena added. "And you too. You didn't just find her. You helped her hold on." Keanu didn't reply. He didn't feel heroic. He felt human, worn, quiet, but under it all, relieved. Not for himself, for her. The light dimmed as dusk fell over the yard. The chaos was over, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. Mia sat nestled in her mother's arms on a makeshift bench. Her father remained close, gently brushing strands of her hair back, as if afraid she might disappear again. The bunny sat in her lap, worn but safe, a small guardian who had witnessed too much. Paramedics waited a short distance away. No one moved to separate them. The agents knew this moment wasn't for paperwork or procedures, it was for healing. Steven leaned against a shipping container, arms crossed. "She hasn't said a word," he murmured. Keanu stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching the girl. "She will. When it matters." A quiet passed between them. "She's strong," Steven said. Keanu nodded. "The strongest one here." For a moment, neither man spoke. There was nothing more to say. Then Mia lifted her head slightly. Her gaze found Keanu's through the settling dark. It held no fear, no anger, just a soft, almost imperceptible expression, something like peace. She raised her bunny and hugged it tighter. A small gesture, but unmistakable. Keanu gave a slight nod. It was enough. Steven pushed off the container. "We should let them be." Keanu didn't argue. They turned together and began walking slowly toward the edge of the yard. Behind them, Mia remained with her family. No flashes, no drama. Just three people holding onto something they thought was lost. Keanu and Steven didn't look back. This story wasn't about them. It was hers. The child who sent a silent signal from beneath fear, who didn't scream, who didn't fight, who simply found a way to be heard. In a world of noise, she had spoken with silence, and that silence had saved her. The makeshift command post buzzed with energy. LAPD officers and federal agents moved in coordinated sweeps, combing every inch of the freight yard. Bright halogen lights illuminated the stacks of containers, revealing what had once hidden in plain sight. Confiscated duffel bags were now tagged and opened, spilling out bundles of foreign currency, counterfeit passports, cell phones stripped of SIM cards, and ledgers scribbled with initials, dates, and coded entries. One agent leaned toward Steven with a clipboard in hand. "We just confirmed it. The entire VIP clearance system, first-class escorts, expedited security bypasses, customs pre-clears, it was all part of a larger laundering and trafficking loop. We found booking sheets disguised as airport scheduling reports." Steven didn't react with surprise, just a slow nod. "How long? Best guess? Over 7 years, maybe longer. They moved people and money through legitimate travel routes, smuggled documents under diplomatic shipments. It was airtight." Steven glanced across the container yard where Keanu stood, arms folded, observing quietly. "It's not airtight anymore." The agent gave a thin smile. "Number, it's cracked wide open. And the manager you chased down, he's already naming names. Said he'll give up the entire network in exchange for a deal." Keanu stepped in as the agent finished. "They always talk fast when they see the light coming," Steven added. "They weren't prepared for her." The agent looked confused. "Mia," Keanu said. "The girl." The agent's eyes softened. "We never would have found this without her signal." Steven's jaw clenched. One girl just brought down an empire. Keanu didn't speak right away. He turned his head, glancing toward the spot where Mia and her family remained under warm blankets, shielded now by federal care. Then his eyes swept the yard again. The makeshift cages that had been disguised as ventilation boxes, the fake badges, the silence of it all. "One signal saved her life," he finally said. "How many others don't get seen?" Steven didn't answer. The question wasn't for him. Another agent approached holding a flash drive. Surveillance footage. Every takeoff and landing for the last 6 months. Stored off-grid. "We'll be running facial recognition tonight." Keanu took the drive in his hand, stared at it for a beat, then passed it back. "Good," he said. "But it's not enough." Steven glanced at him. Keanu's voice lowered. "We need to do more." Steven's silence held weight. He could see it in Keanu's face, that line between exhaustion and awakening. This wasn't just another close call. This was a shift. A young officer approached, eyes wide with adrenaline and awe. "Sir, we just found another compartment in one of the trucks. False floor. 2 more girls. Alive." Keanu's chest tightened. "Get medics now," They're already en route. The officer turned and sprinted back. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathed in, then out. He didn't need to say what he was thinking. The system had almost worked. Almost. If not for Mia's signal, if not for Steven's instincts, if not for a misstep, a glimmer of fear in a crowded terminal, they'd still be blind. Steven broke the silence. You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm not just thinking it, Keanu said. I'm already there. They both turned to the lead DHS official, a woman in a Navy field coat coordinating extraction logistics. She glanced up, surprised by the directness in their eyes. Steven said it plain. We want in. She raised a brow. In what sense? Training, prevention, frontline identification. Keanu listed. You've got agents missing cues because they don't know what to look for. Steven added. We do. And there's a public who wants to help, but they don't know how. You give us 5 minutes on national television. We'll teach them the signal. Keanu nodded. No more kids lost in plain sight. The official looked between them. We've never had civilians embedded in federal prevention protocols. You do now, Keanu said. Her expression didn't harden, it deepened. She saw the truth in their eyes. Not actors, not bystanders. Men who'd walked straight into fire for a child they didn't know. I'll draft a proposal, she said. Fast. Steven nodded. We'll make it faster. Suddenly, an explosion of lights flooded the freight entrance. More vehicles arrived, press vans, camera crews, local reporters climbing out with microphones extended, shouting questions toward the barricades. Keanu sighed. Here we go. Steven's voice was calm. You want to speak? Keanu shook his head. Number, but I need to. He took a deep breath, glanced down at his still blood-stained shirt, then stepped toward the media line. Every step felt heavier than the last, but not from fatigue, from the weight of truth he was about to share. No handlers, no scripts, just what the world needed to hear. The cameras flicked on, red lights blinking to life. Reporters raised microphones, but Keanu didn't wait for a question. I'm not here as a celebrity, he began, voice steady. I'm here because a little girl named Mia had the courage to speak when no one else could. Silence rippled across the crowd. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She raised her hand in the language of survival, and the world almost missed it. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. I want every parent, every teacher, every traveler to learn this signal, he said, raising his hand and folding his thumb inward, then closing his fingers around it. This isn't just a gesture. It's a lifeline. Flashes burst from camera bulbs, but no one interrupted. We live in a world where evil hides in plain sight. We walk past it at airports, on buses, in hotels. But today, one girl made a different choice. She reminded us, we don't need permission to act. We need awareness. Steven stepped beside him but didn't speak. His presence was enough silent backup to a message echoing through millions of screens. The VIP lane that allowed her abductor through? It wasn't about status. It was about access, money, secrecy. And now that system is exposed, and it will not survive. One of the reporters raised a hand slowly. Mr. Reeves, are you saying you're going to campaign against airport security systems? Keanu looked at him squarely. Number, I'm saying I'm going to fight for children who don't get rescued. I'm going to fight for those who are still out there, praying someone will see them. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We can't pretend we didn't see what happened here. And we sure as hell can't forget it. Mia deserves more than headlines. She deserves a world that works to protect her. He stepped back. Steven followed, and together, they walked past the barricades, leaving the cameras behind. A new kind of silence followed them. Not confusion, not awe, something deeper, conviction. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew. This wasn't the end of the mission. It was the beginning. Keanu sat alone on a metal bench outside the arrivals terminal. The chaos of flashing lights, sirens, and rushing agents had quieted hours ago. Now, only the low hum of taxi engines, rolling luggage wheels, and the occasional distant announcement echoed across the concrete. Overhead, a plane lifted into the sky, its wings catching the last orange rays of the sun. He watched it disappear into the horizon. Then, another followed, and another. It was routine, this cycle of takeoffs and landings. People coming and going, lives intersecting for moments before splitting off again. But today had torn a hole through that routine. Today, the silence had been shattered by a signal no one was trained to see, except her, Mia. He could still feel the weight of her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Not out of fear anymore, out of fragile trust. A child who had been invisible in plain sight had chosen him, not because he was famous, not because he was anyone special, but because in that moment he had looked, and because she dared to raise her hand. The sky deepened to violet, shadows stretching long across the lot. Keanu pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. It was worn, creased at the edges. He flipped to a clean page, uncapped a pen, and stared at the blank space for a while. Then he wrote, "To the ones watching behind glass. To the security agents, the teachers, the drivers, the clerks at check-in. You might be the only one who notices. There are signals you'll miss, but some, if you're lucky, you'll catch. And when you do, everything changes." He paused, tapping the pen twice. There are millions of silent signals we miss every day. It's time we learn how to see them. He signed only his first name. Not for attention, not for credit, just a quiet note, a ripple. Then he folded the paper and slid it into an envelope addressed simply to a foundation he'd once read about. One that trained airline and hospitality staff to detect signs of human trafficking. It wasn't much, but it was something, a beginning. Keanu stayed seated long after the last streak of sun dipped behind the horizon. The sky turned navy blue, stars flickering into view above the airport's glass canopy. A breeze moved through the trees lining the sidewalk, soft and cooling, but it did little to ease the heaviness in his chest. He thought about the bear, that small, worn-out stuffed animal tucked under Mia's arm. A bear missing one eye, its fur matted and ear nearly torn. It had been her lifeline, her secret, her only voice. She had used it to signal distress without saying a word. A child had cracked a code none of them were trained to see. He couldn't stop thinking about how many others never got that chance. Steven eventually found him outside. The agent didn't say much, just walked over, leaned against a concrete pillar nearby, and lit a cigarette without lighting it. It was something he did when he wanted to focus. Keanu finally broke the silence. "She's safe?" Steven nodded slowly. "Yeah, her parents took her home about an hour ago. She still hasn't said a word, but she's eating." And she held her mom's hand the whole ride to the hotel. There was a pause. Then Steven added, "She gave your bear to the nurses, said it should stay with the next kid who comes in scared." Keanu looked down, swallowing hard. "She's stronger than most grown men I know." Steven chuckled faintly. "She's stronger than me." They didn't speak for a while, just let the quiet sit between them. Not heavy, not empty, just still. Then Steven turned slightly and said, "You know, we've been chasing this ring for over 4 years. That airport manager, he gave us more names in 6 hours than we've gotten from months of surveillance." Keanu leaned back. "And it all started with one girl. One signal." Steven looked at him carefully. "She didn't save just herself. She blew the doors off an entire system. She exposed a corridor of silence. And she did it while terrified." Keanu's voice lowered. "Makes you wonder how many corridors are still running, still hidden." Steven didn't answer. He didn't need to. Keanu pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a blank text draft. He stared at it for a moment, then typed, "We need to do more." He hit save, not send, not yet. That message wasn't meant for just one person. It was for something bigger, a calling he hadn't realized until now. He had seen a lot of things in his life. Movie sets, charity galas, war zones during peacekeeping visits. But nothing had shaken him like the way Mia's hand gripped his shirt. No dialogue, no script, just pure instinct. It rewired something in him. Not to act, but to serve, to see. By the time the airport lights came on, Keanu had found a quiet bench near the edge of the long-term lot. Planes rose and fell behind him, the sky now painted with shades of deep violet and fading orange. He pulled out a small leather notebook he kept in his inner jacket pocket, Nothing digital, just ink and paper. He flipped to a clean page and began to write. There are millions of silent signals we miss. It's time we learn how to see them. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he added, not through surveillance or procedure, but through compassion, through awareness, through care. At the bottom of the page, he drew a small symbol, a simple open eye, a reminder to stay awake, to remain human in a world that too often looks away. He folded the paper and tucked it into an envelope addressed to a foundation that supported trauma-informed training for first responders. Whether they acted on it or not wasn't the point. He had to put the thought into the world. Across the sidewalk, Steven passed by again, on the phone, voice clipped and intense. He was coordinating transfers, evidence, custody chains. Keanu gave him a nod. No words, just gratitude. A family strolled past. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, walked ahead of her parents, pulling a bright pink suitcase. She glanced back, saw Keanu sitting quietly, and gave him a wave. He smiled back. She grinned and skipped forward, arms swinging. That, he thought, was everything. Not glory, not headlines, just one child, safe, free, able to wave without fear. That's what Mia had been robbed of, and that's what had been returned to her. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the day. As he reached his car, he looked back one last time, not at the terminal, but at the space around it. The quiet shadows, the blind corners, the places no one thinks to look. Then, softly, he whispered, "We're not done." As the screen fades to black, the voiceover returns. Have you ever seen something that didn't feel right? A glance, a signal, a moment that made you wonder? What if that moment was someone's only cry for help? If you believe in protecting the voiceless, in seeing what others miss, then subscribe for more incredible stories. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen a silent signal? You might have saved someone without even knowing it.